I come to say to you this afternoon, however difficult the moment,
yes, sir,
however frustrating the hour, it will not be long, because truth crushed earth will rise again.
Yes,
how long? Not long.
Yes, sir.
Because no lie can live forever.
Yes, sir.
How long? Not long.
How long?
Because you shall reap what you sow.
Yes, sir.
How long? Not long.
How long?
Truth forever on the scaffold, wrong forever on the throne.
Yes,
that scaffold sways the future. Behind the dim unknown standeth God within the shadow, keeping watch above his own. How long? Not long. Because the arc of the moral universe is long, but it bends toward justice. How long? Not long.
Not long.
Because mine eyes have seen the glory of the coming of the Lord. He's trampling out the vintage where the grapes of wrath are stored. He's loosed the faithful lightning of his terrible swift sword. His truth is marching on. He has sounded forth the trumpet that shall never call retreat. He is sifting out the hearts of men before his judgment seat. Oh, be swift, my soul, to answer him. Be jubilant, my feet. Our God is marching on. Glory, hallelujah.
8 days ago, a 16-year-old kid picked up a courtesy phone at a store in Washington Township, New Jersey, and announced over the public address system, quote, "Attention Walmart customers, all black people leave the store now," unquote. The boy has been arrested and charged with harassment and bias intimidation. 2 days ago, a Tea Party protester shouted the N-word at Congressman John Lewis of Georgia, one of the heroes of 20th century America, and Congressman Andre Carson of Indiana. And another shouted anti-gay slurs at Congressman Barney Frank of Massachusetts. Capitol Hill police confirmed no arrests were made, and there were no serious efforts to identify the vermin involved. Television, print, and radio news organizations will not be asked to turn over their tapes and images of the event, nor subpoenaed if necessary. This is not to dismiss what the 16-year-old did in New Jersey, but it would seem that what was shouted at the congressman merits at least as much investigation and hopefully as much prosecution. After all, it did occur inside the halls of Congress, a place at least as crowded as and as sanctified as a Walmart. But in a backwards, sick-to-my-stomach way, I would like to thank whoever shouted at Mr. Lewis and Mr. Carson for proving my previous point. If racism is not the whole of the Tea Party, it is in its heart, along with blind hatred, a total disinterest in the welfare of others, and a full-flowered, self-rationalizing refusal to accept the outcomes of elections, or the reality of democracy, or the narrowness of their minds and the equal narrowness of their public support. On Saturday, that support came from evolutionary regressives like Michelle Bachmann and John Voight. On a daily basis, that support comes from the racists and homophobes of radio and television, the Michael Savages and the Rush Limbaughs. Shockingly, that support even comes on a specific basis from another congressman, Republican Devin Nunes of the California 21st. When you use totalitarian tactics, people, begin to act crazy, he said on C-SPAN. And I think, there's people that have every right to say what they want. If they want to smear someone, they can do it. Congressman Nunes, you should resign. You have no business opening the door for a man like John Lewis, let alone serving alongside him. And if you shouldn't resign for your endorsement, your encouragement of the most vile, the most reprehensible, and the most outdated spewings of the lizard brain part of this country, you should resign because of your total disconnect from reality. There have been no totalitarian tactics, Congressman. People, these few sad people, have begun to act crazy because it has been the dedicated purpose, the sole method and sole function of the Republican Party to entice them to act crazy. Those shouts against the congressman, Mr. Nunes, were inspired not by what people like John Lewis have done in their lives. They have been inspired by what people like you have done in the last year. And so the far right escalates the rhetoric and the level of threat just a little more, and worse still, it escalates the level of delusion. The election of a Democratic president is socialism. The election of a black president is an international conspiracy. The enactment of any health care reform is an apocalypse. And the willful denial of reality by the leader of the minority party in Congress is the only truth. A willful denial, incidentally, that includes the leader of the minority party in Congress ignoring the fact that his is the minority party and that he represents the minority, and that despite having broken all the rules of decorum in place in this nation since the end of the Civil War, that despite having played every trick mean and low, despite having the limitless financial backing of one of the biggest cartels in the world, he and his cronies and the manufactured outrage of the Tea Party failed to derail health care reform. Failed, Mr. Boehner. You lost. You blew it. Shame on each and every one of you who substitutes your will and your desires above those of your fellow countrymen, you said last night just before the vote. The will and desire of your countrymen, Mr. Boehner. If you're one of the leaders of a party that in 4 years coughed up the Senate majority, coughed up the House majority, coughed up the White House, coughed up health care reform, and along the way ignored every poll and every election result, I would think the will and desires of your fellow countrymen should be pretty damn clear by now. Your countrymen think your policies are of the past and your tactics are of the gutter.
When activists first tried to march from Selma to Montgomery, they did not make it. A young man named John Lewis, now Congressman John Lewis, was among those beaten nearly to death by Alabama state troopers on the Edmund Pettus Bridge in Selma. That was Bloody Sunday. That was the first try to get to Montgomery. Then the marchers tried again 2 days later. They still did not make it. And then they tried yet again, a third time, and on the third try they did it, a 54-mile march to Montgomery. And in Montgomery, Martin Luther King gave the "How long, not long" speech, the Arc of the Moral Universe speech on the steps of the state capitol, and that was 45 years ago today.
Boehner's teary shame on you over the tyranny of the vast majority taking a scrap back from the elite, clueless minority. That's just an isolated incident. Just as Congressman Nagelbauer shouting "baby killer" at or "it's a baby killer" during Congressman Stupak's laudable speech last night was just an isolated incident. Just as the shouting of the N-words at Congressman Lewis and Carson was just an isolated incident. Just as the spitting on Congressman Cleaver was just an isolated incident. Just as the abuse of Congressman Frank was just an isolated incident. Just as the ethnic slurs shouted at Congressman Rodriguez of Texas was just an isolated incident. Just as the oinking by Congressman Wilson during the president's address was just an isolated incident. Just as whatever is next will just be an isolated incident. You know what they call it when you have a once-a-week series of isolated incidents? They call it two things. They call it a pattern, and in the United States of 2010, they call it the Republican Party.
Former Republican House Speaker Newt Gingrich said Obama and the Democrats will regret their decision to push for comprehensive health reform. Calling the bill, quote, the most radical social experiment in modern times, Gingrich said, quote, they will have destroyed their party much as Lyndon Johnson shattered the Democratic Party for 40 years with the enactment of civil rights legislation in the 1960s. Yeah, Democrats, you don't want to make another big mistake like you did with civil rights. You sure regret supporting civil rights, don't you, the way that worked out?
American political parties have disappeared before. They are never forced out by their rivals. They die by their own hands only because they did not know that the hatred or the myopia or the monomania they thought was still okay wasn't okay anymore. And so I offer this olive branch to the defeated Republicans and Tea Partiers. It is a cold olive branch. It is scarred. There aren't many olives on it, but it still counts. You are rapidly moving from the party of no, past the party of no conscience, towards the party of no relevancy. You are behind the wheel of a political Toyota. And before the midterms, you will have been reduced to only being this generation's home for the nuts. You will be the flat earthers, the isolationists, the segregationists, the John Birchers. Stop. Certainly you must recognize the future is with the humane, the inclusive, the diverse. It is with America. Not the America of 1910, but the America of 2010. Discard this dangerous, separatist, elitist, backward-looking rhetoric, and you will be welcomed back into the political discourse of this nation. But continue with it, and you will destroy yourselves in whatever righteous causes you actually believe in. And on the way, you will damage this country in ways and manners untold. But even that damage will not be permanent. Faubus and the McNamara brothers and Bull Connor and Lindbergh and Joe McCarthy damaged this nation. We survived, and they were swept away by history. You cannot destroy this country, no matter how hard you seem to be trying to, nor can you destroy this country's inexorable march towards the light.
Supporters of health reform think that the reason we elect people to government is so that they can take on the big challenges, like our disastrous lack of a health care system. The Republican budget map they have put forward as an alternative to President Obama's agenda, on the other hand, would repeal Medicare overtime, it would repeal Social Security overtime, privatizing it, and they're against health reform. Universally, not a single Republican vote for it is expected now. Do you want a government that does something, or don't you?
Hell no, you can't!
Yes, we can.